He doesn't just enter a room, he dominates it. Every breath, every silence, every flick of his cigarette feels like a calculation. When others scream, he whispers. When the world burns, he simply watches the flames. Thomas Shelby, the man who walks through chaos as if it were a strategy. To most, he is the definition of control, untouchable, unshakable, unreadable. But beneath that mask of discipline, what truly survives? Is it stoic wisdom, or something colder, the calm that comes not from peace, but from emptiness? Tommy once said, "I don't pay for suits. My suits are on the house, or the tailor's dead." It's more than arrogance. It's a philosophy born in the trenches, a belief that control means survival. Yet the Stoics would ask, control over what? The world outside, or the storm within? Chrysippus, the forgotten architect of Stoicism, once taught, "We suffer not from events themselves, but from the opinions we form about them." Thomas Shelby embodies that principle like a soldier living on borrowed time. He doesn't react, he calculates. He doesn't fear, he plans. His mind is a fortress built on reason and detachment. But what happens when the fortress becomes a tomb? When reason stops protecting you and starts isolating you from life itself? In that silence behind his eyes lies the real question. Has Thomas Shelby transcended emotion, or simply buried it alive? Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse, where ancient wisdom shines light on modern chaos. Let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward peace and wisdom. If you seek that light, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because today we're about to put the legend of Thomas Shelby on trial through the lens of Stoic philosophy. Was he a man of virtue, or a tyrant disguised as a philosopher? Did he truly master his emotions, or just numb them into submission? With the insights of Chrysippus, Zeno, Ryan Holiday, and William B. Irvine, we'll uncover the difference between control and wisdom, between discipline and peace. Because the greatest illusion of power is believing you've conquered everything, when in truth, you've only lost yourself. Number 1, calm in the eye of the storm, mastering reactions. In every crisis, when guns rise and tempers explode, Thomas Shelby remains still, a ghost carved from ice. His men panic, his enemies shout, but Tommy, he calculates. That is his superpower, the ability to remain untouched by chaos. In the middle of storms, he becomes the storm's calm center. It's not just strategy, it's survival through serenity. The question is, does this make him a stoic master of emotion, or a man who has simply forgotten how to feel? The Stoics taught that between stimulus and response, there is space, and within that space lies our power. Most people react instantly, slaves to fear and anger. But a Stoic learns to widen that gap, to see the event, understand it, and then choose the reaction. That gap is where freedom lives. Tommy Shelby doesn't just live in that space, he thrives there. He studies every betrayal, every threat, every insult, and refuses to be rushed. While others burn in emotion, he stands in the ashes, thinking. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, once taught, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself." Thomas Shelby lives that truth with surgical precision. When Inspector Campbell corners him, when Alfie Solomons betrays him, when Luca Changretta declares war, Tommy never flinches. He doesn't scream or break. He observes, adapts, and acts. He turns his emotions into weapons, using silence where others use rage. To his enemies, his stillness is terrifying, because nothing is more unpredictable than a man who does not react. Robert Greene, in the 48 Laws of Power, echoes this principle. Control your emotions. The unsteady hand betrays your plan. In Tommy's world, composure is a currency, and he's rich beyond measure. His restraint confuses his enemies, disarms them. They mistake his silence for weakness until it's too late. But here lies the paradox. Stoic calm is meant to free the soul, not manipulate others. Tommy's calm doesn't liberate him, it weaponizes him. He doesn't seek peace, he seeks advantage. His detachment is not born from wisdom, but from necessity. Musonius Rufus, the mentor of Epictetus, once said, "The greatest victory is to remain master of oneself, even in pain and loss." Tommy achieves that mastery, yet it comes at a cost. Every victory hardens him further. Every act of control pushes him deeper into numbness. He conquers his reactions, but also his capacity for joy, empathy, and peace. What begins as stoic discipline slowly becomes emotional amputation. He controls the storm outside, but what about the storm within? That's the question that will follow him through every decision he makes. Number 2, in the Soldier's Minutes, the power of premeditation. For Thomas Shelby, time isn't measured in hours or days. It's measured in survival. In the trenches of France, every second stretched like an eternity. And in that eternity, he learned the most brutal lesson a man can learn. Life is not about winning. It's about anticipating. Every move, every betrayal, every bullet must be calculated before it happens. Tommy doesn't live in the present. He lives 2, 3, 10 steps ahead. That's not paranoia. It's preparation. It's the Soldier's Minutes, the haunting silence before chaos, where a man rehearses death to make peace with life. That mindset is the living embodiment of one of Stoicism's most powerful exercises, Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of adversity. It is the practice of imagining what could go wrong, not to suffer twice, but to be ready once. The Stoics taught that fortune favors not the fearless, but the prepared. Seneca warned us long ago, the unexpected blow lands heaviest. The wise man anticipates every possibility and is defeated by none. Thomas Shelby breathes that principle. Before a deal, he pictures betrayal. Before a plan, he envisions failure. Before every victory, he imagines death. This isn't pessimism, it's armor. A mind that has already met its worst fears cannot be broken by surprise. In a world of deceit and blood, his calm doesn't come from optimism. It comes from expectation. Ryan Holiday, one of the most prominent voices of modern Stoicism, explains this practice in plain words. Visualizing failure doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to face it. And Tommy faces it every day. When his family doubts him, when his enemies close in, he already knows the outcome. He's played it 100 times in his head. That's why, when everyone else panics, he just lights a cigarette. The battle has already been fought inside him. What remains outside is just choreography. But there's a darker edge to this gift. What happens when a man lives too long inside his own predictions? When preparation becomes obsession? When foresight replaces presence? The Stoics prepared for death so they could live fully. Tommy prepares for death so he can avoid feeling alive. His anticipation, once a shield, becomes a cage, a way to control not only the world, but himself. William B. Irvine, in A Guide to the Good Life, warns, "We can use Stoicism to protect ourselves from pain, but taken too far, it can also protect us from joy." Tommy Shelby is a master of that fine line. His foresight makes him powerful, but it also makes him lonely. He doesn't wait for the storm, he becomes it before it arrives. That's why he's always calm, and why that calm feels so tragic. He survived the war by mastering the art of expecting death. But somewhere along the way, he forgot how to expect life. Number 3, forged in mud, transforming trauma into strength. Before he was a king in Birmingham, Thomas Shelby was a shadow in the tunnels of France, a miner of death. Down there, beneath the earth, surrounded by explosions and screams, he didn't just face war, he became it. Each shovel of dirt, each echoing blast, stripped away another layer of who he once was. When he came back from the trenches, he wasn't the same man. He was a ghost wearing a soldier's uniform. But ghosts can't die, and that's exactly what made him invincible. His trauma became his armor, his pain, his fuel. While others were crushed by the memories, Tommy turned his nightmares into strategy. He turned fear into focus, grief into ambition. In doing so, he embodied one of the hardest truths of Stoic philosophy. The obstacle is not the end, it's the way forward. As Marcus Aurelius's teacher, Rusticus, once reminded him, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That phrase, later immortalized by Ryan Holiday, could be carved on Tommy's heart. He doesn't run from his pain. He weaponizes it. Every scar becomes a lesson, every loss a calculation. But this is not serenity. It's survival masquerading as strength. He's proof that you can conquer the world while losing your soul in the process. Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls this kind of transformation anti-fragility, the rare power to grow stronger through chaos. Thomas Shelby is anti-fragile to the core. He doesn't just endure fire, he forges himself in it. When life collapses, he doesn't rebuild, he reinvents. He thrives in uncertainty because comfort is the one battlefield he never learned to survive. Chrysippus, the architect of Stoic logic, once said, "Fire tests gold, and adversity tests brave men." And if that's true, then Thomas Shelby is pure steel. The war broke him, yet from the pieces he constructed something terrifyingly efficient. A man immune to panic, immune to weakness. But here's the tragedy. The same fire that forged him also burned away his capacity for peace. His trauma didn't just make him strong, it made him addicted to conflict. He's calm in chaos because chaos is the only place he still feels alive. Donald Robertson, a modern Stoic scholar, once observed, "To heal is to learn how to suffer well, not to avoid suffering entirely." Tommy never learned that distinction. He mastered endurance, not healing. His strength is undeniable, but it's brittle, like armor that never comes off. Every victory demands another war because stillness feels like death to him. And so he keeps moving forward, mistaking pain for progress, control for peace, and war for purpose. Thomas Shelby transformed trauma into power, but power without healing is poison. The Stoics sought tranquility through understanding. Tommy seeks it through dominance. What he calls strength might just be another form of escape. Number 4, the endless climb, the slavery of more. Thomas Shelby never stops climbing. Every victory, every empire, every title, it's never enough. The moment he reaches one peak, his eyes are already fixed on another. To the world, that looks like ambition. To a Stoic, it looks like slavery, because the man who needs more is never free. His calm might fool the crowd, but beneath it lives a hunger that no success can silence. What drives him isn't greed. It's the illusion that one more victory will finally fill the emptiness the war left behind. He believes peace is waiting just beyond the next deal, the next expansion, the next conquest. But peace never comes. The mountain keeps growing. Each triumph only deepens the abyss inside. This is not the Stoic pursuit of excellence, it's the modern disease of endless striving. Epictetus warned about this centuries ago. He reminded his students, freedom is not achieved by satisfying desires, but by eliminating them. Tommy does the opposite. He multiplies his desires and calls it discipline. He tells himself it's about family, about legacy, about order, but deep down, he knows it's about control. Because as long as he's conquering the outside world, he doesn't have to face the one inside. He mistakes movement for meaning, chaos for purpose. Yuval Noah Harari, a modern historian of human behavior, describes this cycle as the luxury trap. Every time we gain comfort, we create a new standard that enslaves us again. That's the prison Tommy builds for himself, a golden cage of success. His wealth, his fame, his power, all become new chains that tighten with every step up the ladder. Zeno of Citium taught the opposite path. Man's happiness depends on being content with what nature gives, not with what he imagines he deserves. But Tommy's imagination never rests. It devours him. His calm exterior hides an exhausted soul chasing ghosts of purpose. He doesn't crave money or influence. He craves silence, the silence that died in France and never came back. The tragedy is that he thinks he can earn it. That's why he keeps moving, keeps fighting, keeps building. William B. Irvine often explains that the Stoics' greatest victory is not external success, but internal satisfaction. To need less is to own more of yourself. Thomas Shelby owns everything but himself. His ambition isn't a ladder. It's a treadmill powered by guilt and pain. Every deal, every gunfight, every manipulation is an act of desperation disguised as genius. He's not running toward greatness. He's running from emptiness. The Stoics called this chasing of externals the path of the fool, a road paved with victories that lead nowhere. And Tommy, the sharpest man in Birmingham, walks it with perfect precision, conquering everything except the one thing that truly matters: peace. Number 5. Ghosts of the mind, the absence of inner peace. When the streets fall silent and the whiskey burns low, the mask of Thomas Shelby begins to crack. Behind the quiet eyes and the steady voice, there's a man haunted by ghosts he can't silence. The war never ended for him. It just changed its battlefield. The explosions now echo inside his mind. The enemies now wear his own face. In those moments of stillness, when there's no plan to execute, no empire to build, he meets the one adversary he can't outthink: himself. The world sees a man of steel, but the Stoics would see a soul in conflict. His discipline, so admired by others, isn't serenity, it's survival. His calm isn't peace, it's paralysis. The Stoic path leads toward ataraxia, inner tranquility. Tommy's path leads in the opposite direction, toward obsession, insomnia, and self-inflicted exile. Chrysippus once wrote, "The disease of the soul is not passion itself, but judgment corrupted by false belief." And that's exactly what consumes Thomas Shelby. His mind confuses silence with strength, detachment with wisdom. He believes feeling nothing means he's finally in control. But numbness isn't mastery, it's decay. The Stoics taught us to transform emotion through understanding, not to bury it alive. Tommy doesn't feel less because he's wise. He feels less because he's broken. Modern psychology echoes the same warning. Dr. Gabor Mate reminds us, trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. Inside Tommy, that trauma festers. The nightmares, the hallucinations, the whispers from the trenches, they're not memories, they're infections. His so-called discipline is a bandage over a wound that never healed. He turns to opium and whiskey not for pleasure, but for quiet, because even his own thoughts have become too loud. Musonius Rufus, often called the Roman Socrates, taught that real peace cannot exist in a soul that hides from truth. If you wish to be calm, do not run from yourself. Face yourself as you are. Tommy never does. He builds empires instead of facing mirrors. He fights battles instead of facing feelings. His control is impressive, yes, but it's also tragic. Because every night when he closes his eyes, that control collapses and the ghosts come marching back from France, demanding payment for every moment he tried to forget. Thomas Shelby is not a man without fear. He's a man entirely consumed by it. He's mastered the world outside but surrendered the kingdom within. He's the very embodiment of a Stoic paradox, the man who conquered chaos but couldn't conquer himself. Number 6. The virtue forgotten. Where is justice? Thomas Shelby commands his world with precision, but power without virtue is just control wearing a crown. In the philosophy of the Stoics, every act of strength must serve justice, the harmony of the soul with humanity itself. For them, courage, temperance, and wisdom were meaningless if not guided by justice. But Tommy's discipline doesn't serve the world. It serves his ambition, his family, his pain. He isn't guided by justice, he's guided by survival. To understand his fall from virtue, We must first remember what justice meant to the Stoics. It wasn't about law or punishment. It was about alignment with nature, about serving the greater good. Marcus Aurelius's mentor, Chrysippus, once declared, "What is not good for the hive cannot be good for the bee." For the Stoic sage, no man truly wins if his victory harms the whole. But Thomas Shelby is no servant of the hive. His empire rises from manipulation, blood, and fear. His family becomes his justification for every crime, his shield against moral accountability. He tells himself he's protecting them, but in truth, he's protecting the void within. Donald Robertson reminds us that Stoicism's foundation lies not in dominance, but in duty, in the moral courage to act for the collective good. Tommy twists that principle. He sees people as chess pieces, tools for control. His alliances are transactional, his compassion conditional. His brilliance becomes a weapon, not a light. Zeno of Citium envisioned a cosmopolis, a single human community bound by reason and empathy. He imagined a world without borders, where all were citizens of the same moral universe. But Tommy's world is smaller, bounded by bloodlines and profit margins. He builds walls where Stoics built bridges. His empire is efficient but soulless. Musonius Rufus once warned, "He who is not good to others cannot be good to himself." That's the paradox of Thomas Shelby. He builds power to protect his people, but his methods destroy them. His pursuit of justice begins noble, avenging his family's suffering, restoring their dignity, but it soon curdles into tyranny. He becomes the very thing he swore to defeat, a ruler whose peace depends on the fear of others. Modern philosopher John Rawls proposed a simple test for justice, the veil of ignorance. Imagine rebuilding society without knowing your place in it. Would you still create the same world? If Tommy applied that test, he'd see that his empire, built on fear and manipulation, would crush him if he were born on the other side of it. But he doesn't see, because justice for him is always personal. The Stoics believed that virtue was a unified whole. You couldn't have one without the others. Courage without justice is brutality. Wisdom without temperance is arrogance. Discipline without virtue is tyranny. Thomas Shelby has mastered discipline, strategy, and control. But stripped of justice, they turn from virtues into vices. He doesn't serve the good, he bends it. He doesn't protect others, he uses them. And in doing so, he proves one of the oldest Stoic truths. A man without virtue may rule others, but he can never rule himself. Number 7. The final verdict, a powerful engine without a moral compass. The trial of Thomas Shelby comes to its end. We've seen his calm under fire, his premeditated brilliance, his transformation through pain, and his relentless pursuit of control. But when weighed on the scales of Stoic philosophy, one truth becomes undeniable. Thomas Shelby is not a Stoic sage. He is a weapon without a guide, a powerful engine roaring without a compass. His mastery of discipline, foresight, and resilience is unquestionable, but his direction is lost. He drives forward with purpose, yet never questions where the road leads. The Stoics believed that power means nothing without virtue. As William B. Irvine often explains, the Stoic path isn't about control. It's about alignment, living in harmony with reason, justice, and nature itself. Tommy lives in harmony with nothing. He bends reason to his will, twists justice to serve his family, and treats nature as something to dominate. The result is a man who controls everything except his own soul. Zeno of Citium taught that a wise man is free even in chains because his freedom comes from within. Tommy reverses this. He's a prisoner wrapped in power. His empire grows, his influence expands, but his mind remains confined to the same trench he dug in France. The battlefield changed, the war never did. Plato, whose ideas shaped Stoic ethics, warned about this kind of man. He called him the tyrant soul. The tyrant lives in fear and craving, enslaved to his own appetites, even as he rules others. That is the essence of Thomas Shelby. He doesn't sleep, doesn't trust, doesn't rest. Every move is another campaign against ghosts no one else can see. He thinks control brings safety, but it only tightens his cage. The walls he builds around himself, power, status, discipline, are the very barriers that keep him from peace. Ryan Holiday calls this the corruption of Stoicism, when its tools are used to conquer rather than to liberate. He warns, discipline without virtue becomes tyranny, reason without compassion becomes manipulation. That's the tragic brilliance of Thomas Shelby. He took the techniques of the Stoics, calm, detachment, planning, and stripped them of their soul. He turned wisdom into weaponry. He's the Stoic machine, perfected, efficient, emotionless, unstoppable, but hollow. Chrysippus once said, "The good man is guided by virtue, not by circumstance." Tommy reversed the equation. He lets circumstance define his virtue. His moral code shifts with convenience. What was once honor becomes strategy. What was once protection becomes domination. His power serves no greater order. It feeds on itself. In the end, Thomas Shelby isn't evil. He's empty. He's proof that strength without wisdom collapses into suffering. That calm without purpose is just silence before the fall. His tragedy isn't that he failed to become a Stoic, it's that he got so close. He learned how to endure, but never how to be free. The Stoics sought harmony between the mind and the universe. Tommy achieved control over both, but lost the harmony. The fire that forged him became the one that consumed him. He became the perfect soldier of reason and the eternal prisoner of himself. Number 8. The legacy of the broken angel. 3 lessons from Thomas Shelby for the 21st century. Thomas Shelby's story is not just a portrait of one man's descent into power. It's a mirror for our time. In an age obsessed with control, productivity, and performance, his life feels uncomfortably familiar. He is the perfect symbol of the modern warrior, disciplined, strategic, relentless, and profoundly lost. But within his tragedy lie 3 lessons every modern Stoic, every seeker of peace must confront. The first lesson: unhealed pain becomes purpose distorted. Tommy turned his trauma into drive, and the world rewarded him for it. His pain became his edge, his motivation, his legend. But what the world calls resilience can sometimes be unresolved agony wearing armor. He learned to endure suffering, but never to process it. Modern Stoics like Donald Robertson remind us that the goal of philosophy isn't to suppress emotion, it's to transform it, to look at the wound, not to hide it. According to the psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, until we make the story of our trauma our own, our body will keep reliving it for us. That's Tommy's curse and ours. We glorify endurance, but rarely talk about healing. We celebrate strength, but neglect recovery. His lesson warns us, if you don't face your ghosts, you'll spend your life building empires just to escape them. The second lesson: discipline without virtue leads to emptiness. Thomas Shelby is the modern saint of hustle culture, waking early, working harder, outsmarting everyone. But as Musonius Rufus once taught, the only training that matters is the one that makes us better human beings. Tommy's discipline is flawless, but it serves no higher cause. It's precision without direction. We live in a world that mistakes exhaustion for excellence, and Shelby is its prophet. The Stoics saw discipline as a tool for harmony, not domination. Without justice, compassion, or moral purpose, even the purest self-control turns poisonous. The third lesson: preparation without acceptance breeds anxiety. Tommy plans for everything: betrayal, failure, death, because control feels safer than faith. He practices the Stoic art of premeditatio malorum, but without its soul. He imagines the worst to prevent it, not to accept it. As William B. Irvine reminds us, the goal of Stoic contemplation is not to control the future, but to find serenity in its uncertainty. In the modern world, we're all Tommies, forecasting, optimizing, controlling, but rarely living. His story warns us that total control is an illusion, and the price of chasing it is peace itself. Ryan Holiday once wrote, "The Stoics teach us to turn pain into power, but never to confuse power with peace." And that is the ultimate legacy of the broken angel of Birmingham. He teaches us that strength without virtue is hollow, discipline without wisdom is dangerous, and control without acceptance is suffering disguised as success. His empire was vast, his name immortal, yet he never found the tranquility the Stoics promised. Thomas Shelby stands as a warning carved in stone. You can command the world, but if you fail to master your mind, victory becomes another form of defeat. His story is not just history, it's prophecy. Thomas Shelby's life ends where every Stoic journey begins, at the edge between control and surrender. He mastered everything a man can master: fear, chaos, strategy, and pain. Yet the one thing he never conquered was peace. His story is not about crime or power. It's about the tragedy of a man who mistook silence for wisdom and numbness for freedom. He is a monument to the cost of winning the wrong war, the war against oneself. The Stoics would look at Thomas Shelby and see a warning. They would see a man who embodied all their methods but none of their meaning. He planned like Epictetus, endured like Seneca, and commanded like Marcus Aurelius. Yet he forgot the purpose behind it all: virtue. For a Stoic, mastery means harmony, not domination. It means acting justly, living wisely, and accepting what cannot be controlled. Tommy fought the universe and called it strength. But the universe never fought him back. It simply watched as he destroyed himself in slow motion. Chrysippus once wrote, "The wise man's peace is not found in the absence of storms, but in learning how to stand calmly within them." Thomas Shelby stood in many storms, but never found calm. His legacy reminds us that strength without virtue is noise, and wisdom without compassion is emptiness. His calm wasn't enlightenment, it was exhaustion. His silence wasn't serenity, it was surrender to despair. And so, his story becomes our mirror. Because in chasing power, control, or perfection, we all risk becoming what Tommy became, soldiers of reason who forget how to feel. Yet, if we choose reflection over reaction, compassion over conquest, and healing over hiding, we can walk a different path. The Stoic path, the path toward peace. Before you go, tell us in the comments, who do you believe Thomas Shelby truly was? A disciplined hero or a broken soul pretending to be one? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story brought you clarity or reflection, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs its message, and subscribe to the Stoic Lighthouse so we can continue shining wisdom through the fog of modern chaos. And in our next video, we'll explore a truth that shakes every heart. You'll only understand what happiness really is when you imagine losing everything. A lesson that might just change the way you see your life forever. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "A man's worth is no greater than the worth of what he loves." And Thomas Shelby loved control, more than peace, more than life itself. See you in the next video.